going to change subject in a very dramatic fashion because something we've spoken about a couple of times on the show is autism. And it's not something I understand very well. The only the only thing I really know about it is one of my best friends is he and his wife, they live in Texas, and he has an autistic kid who's on the spectrum somewhere. And I've met the kid a number of times, and for all intents and purposes, I wouldn't know unless they told me that there was anything wrong, except that he's, socially a little bit awkward. But then, for God's sake, so was I when I was a kid. And I'm sure many of us can remember occasions where we were awkward around adults, or where we didn't necessarily make friends very easily, or we struggled to communicate effectively. So it's hard for me to figure exactly how this autism thing works. So we're going to speak to someone called Ilana just now. She's the author of a book called Saving My Sons. It's a journey with autism. And we're going to speak to her because she's also the Star Academy's managing director. And I just want to know how it all works so that I don't sound like a complete ignoramus around people who are dealing with autism in their families. At the moment, I'm very careful, and I'm sure you are too, because I don't want to say anything that sounds stupid or offensive or inconsiderate, indelicate about this thing, because I don't know. Sometimes you've got a very, very light, to put it again, I don't even know what the words are to be used here, but you've got a light form of autism with some people.
So some more severe cases than others, and you don't understand how that works.
And really, apart from this friend of mine's kid and Rain Man, I don't know anything about autism.
So essentially, you're saying that there's a sensitive and complicated scientific topic that you don't know enough to feel informed enough about to hold the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to inform the crap out of yourself now by getting someone who really knows the topic to explain it to you. That sounds almost like informing yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a healthy thing to do, right?
Yeah, you could develop a bunch of opinions first. I mean, that's the standard practice, and then find someone who already agrees with you to back them up. But talking to an expert is a pretty good approach too.
Well, apparently in South Africa, 1 in 54 children is diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, ASD. That's quite a big number, 1 in 54. Yeah. We were talking about rare diseases yesterday, and we had a really interesting conversation about some of these very, very particular and peculiar diseases. There are like 4,000 of them, and the number of people suffering from them at any given time can be anywhere between like one person in the whole of South Africa who has one of them and like 500. But it's still bizarre. I mean, here we've got 1 in 54 kids who's diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. So let's talk to Ilana Gershowitz, who is the author of Saving My Sons. Hey Ilana, how are you?
Good morning, Gareth. Wonderful to be here today.
Yeah, nice to see you. So listen, I'm so scared to even talk about autism because it's such a sensitive subject. And I know I'm not informed. And Gord and I were just joking now that because we know so little, we just don't even talk about it. You've got one son who's got autism?
Correct. And I'm so glad that you made that comment. It is a very broad topic, and there are many views around the spectrum. And I think there are many voices that represent the spectrum. So let's just say to your listeners today, I'm the mother of a severely autistic son who's 18 years old, and I'm speaking on autism representing that voice.
Okay.
We have so many voices on autism, and we really respect all of them.
All right, but Ilana, the fact is, like, I don't know what severely autistic means. I know if someone is cripple, I mean, I don't even think that word's acceptable anymore. But if someone's lame, right? Like they can't move their legs, or if they're quadriplegic or paraplegic. If someone's got sinus problems. If someone's got one eye. But how do I even know if someone's got autism, and how do I know how to interpret that? Like, how did you figure out that your son had autism, and what age was he when you did?
Fantastic question. So autism is a spectrum. On the one end of the spectrum, we can have a young child who cannot speak at all and isn't reaching their milestones. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we can have a child or an adult who can communicate and function, but they have social deficits. So really, autism is a spectrum. how I identified autism in my son, who's now 18. When he was 2 years old, he didn't reach his milestones. He wasn't babbling on time. He wasn't following our receptive commands. And so there are a list of red flags to autism. And that's why I'm so happy that we're talking about this today, with 2 April being World Autism Awareness Day. We want to make sure that parents understand what are the red flags to autism.
What is the difference, though, between a kid who's not reaching their milestones because they're just deficient, like they've mentally, intellectually disabled, let's say, or they haven't had enough proper resources, like they didn't get enough food when their brain was developing or whatever, and then autism, which is obviously very different to those two? How do we know the difference?
I'm so glad you raised that, because the red flags to autism are very specific. So in a young developing child, what are we going to look for? Is the child making eye contact? Are they responding to their name? Can they imitate? Are they developing vocal speech? Are they playing appropriately with their toys? And then we also see inappropriate behaviors from an autistic child, which will be, for example, they'll flap their hands, they'll walk on their toes. And so when we look at whether or not a child is presenting with autism, we're going to look at, are they presenting with repetitive behaviors, delayed language, social deficits? There are criteria listed in those 3 domains, and it's very clear if the child does or does not have autism. Usually we can pick that up already at 18 months. 18-month-old baby needs to be imitating their parents, and they need to be pointing. They need to have all those prerequisite skills to language. I hear what you're saying. Can the child just possibly be delayed? We don't want to just alarm parents raising young children. It is possible, but the developmental milestones are there for a reason. And if parents pick up any extraordinary behavior, like a fussy eater, excessive tantruming, not playing appropriately with toys, the glaring red flags, they must discuss with their pediatrician.
Because you mentioned standing on toes and flapping of hands, and I mean, I don't have kids of my own, but I've got nieces, and I mean, I know when kids are little, perfectly ordinary kids will do that kind of thing from time to time. So there's got to be a distinction between red flags and normal behavior that parents don't have to be concerned about.
You're correct. A young baby will flap their hands, but once they start getting to 18 months, 2 years, if they get excited about something, they shouldn't flap their hands. They should say wow or yay or look at that. So they should start moving to vocal speech. So in a very young infant of a year or 12 months, we can expect some flapping, walking on toes now and again, or because they're walking on the grass and it's tickling their feet, fine. But the parents will know, because the parents will notice that I'd say at least 60 to 70% of the day, they're actually walking on their toes. So it really is going to be glaring. It's going to be, the parents are going to think something's up.
I don't know how to tell if someone's autistic later on in life, though. So with your son who's 18 now, what can and can't he do? How would he be distinct from someone else of his age?
He looks physically normal. So children with autism look physically normal. Right. And that's also why I'm so happy that we're talking about this today, because parents will be raising a typical child and they look physically normal, and then they don't develop on time, and we start seeing these red flags, and the parents think, but I've got a physically, my child looks perfect. He's got perfect features. Everything's fine. His gross motor's fine. How can my child have autism? So how does my 18-year-old present? Gareth, can you imagine an 18-year-old who's non-vocal, who can't speak, who can't vocally express themselves to say, I want water, where they want to go? Many children with autism now are trapped, and they are representing as a child who cannot express their needs, asked to go to the bathroom, express emotion. I'm scared, I'm hungry, where's my daddy? So through the right treatments, my 18-year-old has become a functional and independent adult. Even though he is the most profoundly autistic child, he is very severe on the spectrum, but through the right treatment, he actually communicates via an iPad where he can appropriately communicate his needs.
So is it a I need to understand what causes this. Is it some kind of uh, addling of the brain? Is it some sort of malfunctioning of the brain, or is it a social problem, as in a nervousness or an anxiety that's just so profound that they can't communicate? How does it manifest, and what are these treatments you're talking about for autism?
How does it manifest? We have a genetic vulnerability, and then we have environmental triggers that express the genetics. So what are those triggers? The triggers are the food we're eating, the water we're breathing, infection, toxicity. When you look at the studies coming from America, the stats on autism in America, CDC reported last year, 1 in 54 in America. Why? Why? They put it down to, according to my research, toxicity. So that child's genetically more vulnerable to toxins. They struggle to detoxify. Autism is actually an inflammation. There is a very big gut-brain connection. And Gareth, the gut-brain connection in autism is now undeniable. So how do we treat autism? We start with nutrition. We start with correcting nutritional deficiencies, removing food allergies, supporting the immune system, reducing inflammation. So that's what I'm saying now is quite, wow, contrary to old school of thought, which will be prescribing psychiatric medication, coupled with the right medical intervention. We do want the children and the individuals on the spectrum to have access to what we call applied behavior analysis, ABA. ABA is the only evidence-based treatment for children on the spectrum. In America, the US Surgeon General years ago already said, look, this is a medical necessity. In South Africa, this methodology has not yet received recognition. But I want to stress again, if you've seen one individual on the spectrum, you've seen one individual on the spectrum. See, I'm speaking to you about my severely autistic son. You can have...
It's not true for everybody else on the spectrum. No, I understand that. So, I mean, you've really helped me to get a very basic understanding here, but there's still a lot that I don't entirely understand. Is your son or any other severely autistic person, are they able to do normal day-to-day things? I mean, do you think he's ever going to be able to get a job, for example? Can severely autistic people, even if they manage to get functional and they can communicate, can they do work? I mean, can they go and work in a company? Can they do gardening? Can they do basic things?
I love your question. With the right treatments, and my message to parents today is to never give up hope, because you never need to give up on your child's functionality and independence. So what does my son's picture look like today? He's 18 years old. Every morning he works with a chef in a deli, and he has learned to make pizza, hamburgers, hot dogs. He cooks, he makes soups. So, they sell their produce. So yes, my son does have a job, but with a certain amount of supervision. He's not entirely independent. His health is also compromised. Children with autism who are like my son can be very severely ill. So we do on a daily basis have to monitor his health. Some children on the spectrum can have seizures. So that doesn't look very pretty from my vantage point as a parent when, I see my son having a seizure. It's frightening. Not every child on the spectrum will have seizures, but that is the worst picture. But then, Garrett, just to tell you quickly, I have 3 boys. My youngest, who's now 8, he was also diagnosed with autism before 2. And today he's 8 years old. He's in grade 3. He's in a mainstream school. He had best outcomes, and he lost his diagnosis of autism.
Wow. What about, people who you say there's a genetic component? Are there people who have all their kids who are autistic? I mean, listen, just to go back to the job thing for a second. So, I mean, I don't have any people in my business who have special needs, and they're already a handful. I mean, people like Sia, for example.
Hey.
I'm not going to be supervising him. Is it hard to find people who will employ and who will take the trouble and the time that is required here to help an autistic person to fit into society, to have meaning and purpose, and to have something to do every day?
Gareth, it is extremely difficult for parents to achieve this. And I feel for you about Sia, hey? I feel for you.
Major problem.
I'm with you.
No one's allowed being mean to Sia. Inappropriately,
so, Gareth,
especially.
You know, in America, and I know this because my organization is affiliated to an American organization. And in America, a child like my son would get an agent who would be advocating for him to get a job. So not only in South Africa are we also struggling with inclusive education, where children on the spectrum or with the learning challenge are allowed the opportunity to be included in the mainstream. When we do have children who are on various ends of the spectrum, we are struggling very much in South Africa to have people advocate for them and for parents to get opportunity for them. I know that it's so difficult to understand the spectrum, so let's just try and summarize that again. In a young developing child, we want to see them hitting those milestones. You can have a child who's 5 or 7 years old who's not capable of vocal speech. How can that be? Do you have any idea what the parents go through? I speak to parents who are heartbroken and crying on a daily basis. The moms, they say, Ilana, I just want to hear my child's voice. Children on the spectrum don't learn to do those things that other children just typically learn.
Do they have any superpowers? Like we watched Rain Man when we were kids. There was this movie in the 80s where Dustin Hoffman was able to card count, and he was just a maths machine. And we hear that a lot of these autistic kids have extremely high IQs, but that they just can't communicate properly. So it's almost like being a genius, but you're trapped in your own head. Is that something that you've discovered with other people or with your own son, that they have these abilities, but they're just hard to use?
It's very rare, Gareth. 1 in a million. I've seen it. I've been studying autism for the last 17 years because of my son. And it's a myth. The Rain Man idea, that's very, very unusual. That's very, very rare. My organization on a daily basis, we're getting emails, we're getting calls. I'm so scared. My child, let me paint a picture for you. Parents are raising children who are now on the spectrum. We're seeing things that the child's not sleeping. The child's not eating. They're refusing to eat. They're very fussy eaters. And this is the majority of children. They're struggling to toilet train. Now you try this, parents are trying to put food on the table. Coronavirus, we've got an economic crisis. People don't have food security. Now you're faced with an autistic child where you're struggling. They're not sleeping, which means you're not sleeping. They're not talking and communicating. It's not a pretty picture. They're fussy eaters. They can be 90% of them. That's why when we talk about treatments, we want to really treat the gut-brain connection. We can talk more about that, but it's not a pretty picture, Gareth. But then again, if you've seen one individual on the spectrum, you've seen one individual on the spectrum. Let's talk about those children who are completely functional. They are at school, but they're struggling to make friends. They're struggling to establish and maintain friendships. You can have young adults in a workplace environment. They're fully functional. They could cope with a university degree, but they're eccentric. They've got limited interests. They don't pick up social cues.
And I mean, because they don't pick up social cues, there's a huge amount of pressure on people these days to not say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. Now, if you have autism, are people understanding? Is that an excuse that flies with most people? Like if you say, if I was standing at the coffee machine with Gord and I had autism and I said to him, Jesus, you're fat, but because I've got autism, that's just something that spat out of my head, right? And
it would either be because you had autism or you're just a massive dick, which is the real reason you say something like that. But I mean, yes, if I understood you to have autism, I would be okay with it. I'd be okay with it in general, but I take your point.
I could say I had autism.
Yeah, and if I didn't think you're lying, I know you're actually just a dick, I'd be okay with it.
But I mean, is this an excuse that people accept, Ilana?
Gareth, I've had many old ladies in the queue at Pick and Pay want to attack me with their handbag, where I've had to duck a couple of times for standing in the, there's a queue at Pick and Pay. It's like it's for senior citizens that I see now they've added and the disabled. So my 18-year-old looks typically normal, but I'll go stand in that queue, and then the old ladies glare at me and they're like, "Why are you standing here?" And sometimes I feel like, don't worry, in 2 minutes when my son has a massive meltdown at 18 because he's waiting too long in this queue, you'll see why I'm standing here. So people don't understand. It gets very heated, Gareth. There's a lot of bullying that goes on around autism because there's so many different perspectives on autism. I honestly feel, having, like I said, researched this and lived through this for 17 years, that we actually need a new definition, because the autism is defined in terms of the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. And because autism is now such a spectrum,
is there a test you can do? Is there like some kind of test that can show you where you are on that spectrum?
Yes, there's one test called the ADOS test. So yes, absolutely, there's tests. Like I said, we can look at the red flags. We can see if your child is actually got the criteria for the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. But Gareth, the problem is that there's a very strong voice on autism that feel, why do they want to change me? Why do they want to fix this? I'm allowed to be me, and I hear these people. I respect these people so much. In fact, I wish there wouldn't be so much debate, because I'd love to learn more from them. But I think we need a split on the spectrum. This group of people get very upset with parents like me who go, I want my child to talk. I want to change this. I want to fix him. I want him to be accepted by society. Yeah. So there's a lot of controversy. I'm sure you've heard about the whole controversy around the Sia movie as well. So yeah, a lot of debate going on.
Jesus, sounds so. It really is complicated. I wonder what parents. Is there a place? Is there an organization? You part of some kind of society where people who have autistic kids or think they might have autism themselves, that they can.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Something. Sorry, Gareth. Related in that, there's a huge population of society don't have access to the medical care or even the information. I mean, we are obviously have a lot of information access, and we're informing ourselves because we don't know the basics of this. So, where would people who have no idea about this but are hearing red flags, or, perhaps people without access to privilege, etc., can actually go and find out about this?
Use your words, Gord. You're sounding like you're autistic, fans.
Well, that's okay if I am.
Okay, so there's actually a few places that people can go. So first of all, if parents are concerned about the young developing child, I wrote a book. It's called Saving My Son's Journey with Autism, and it is available at all bookstores and online. So the red flags to autism, or the criteria for the DSM-5, is at the back of this book. And I'll say to parents, take this, and or you can just merely access the DSM-5 criteria online, the red flags online, and you can take that to your pediatrician. Book an hour appointment and, talk it over. Because, Gareth, what happens is a lot of parents struggle to get an appointment with a neurologist or a developmental specialist, and then the parents are in limbo for 6 months, a year. Early intervention is key. The sooner the child can get the right treatments, the better their prognosis is going to be. We don't have time to sit on this. So get those red flags to autism. It's available online as well. Take that to your pediatrician, talk it over, and let them help you with the diagnosis. Then I have a Facebook group for parents who want parent support. If you just go to Facebook and you look for Autism Now What, you will find that. And then, we have an outreach program, and that is called actually our Yellow Canaries outreach program. If you Google that, if you go to our website, you can click on Yellow Canaries and you can apply to our outreach program. We try and help as best as possible. That's why I'm so happy that we're talking about this today. April, World Autism Awareness Month coming up. Gareth, you're shining a light on autism, creating awareness. What do we need? Parents need access to medical doctors who can make the diagnosis. They need access to the right educational intervention. They need access to doctors who can help them.
Like, what happened before we knew this stuff? You know, these kids would just be treated like idiots. They would have been, you know, probably locked in a back room of a house in the medieval times and just ignored, or people would be embarrassed about them. You know, they'd leave them out in the wild or something. I wonder, because Tracy says here, not to mention the sensitivity to certain sounds, textures, light, environmental influence, the need to often repeat certain behaviors. I mean, in the days before we understood this stuff, we would have been very cruel to these people.
Gareth, it's still happening. The cruelty is still happening. South Africa doesn't have the resources. We're faced with COVID. Where's the resources for autism? It's at the bottom of the list. And so what you described is still happening a lot. There are being, and you see, you know, you said to me, describe autism. So let me tell you, Gareth, that when you're raising a child, and I love Tracy's comments, because, you know, when that child is sensitive to sound and is sensitive to light and is inflexible, so that means that they don't transition easily. It's very difficult for parents to take these children to church, to synagogue, to the shops. So you become trapped. Your world becomes very, very small.
I mean, it must be so hard for the parents.
It's devastating for the parents. It's absolutely devastating for the parents because, okay, get this. If you can't speak, Gareth, what are you going to do? You're going to bite, you're going to spit, you're going to kick, you're going to tantrum. So a 2-year-old is doing that, right? 3 years old. I've got a little 3-year-old that we're working with currently. She bangs her head on the floor to communicate that we have to help her, that she doesn't injure herself. We have to pad the room, and we're teaching her to not communicate that way and to have a voice. So these children, you know, really need the right interventions.
My God. All right. Well, listen, we're out of time for this morning, but you've given me a hell of a lot to think about, and it is a fascinating area of you know, of treatment and care, and you know, even these tests are amazing. I've got to find out more about those too. But thank you, and well done for writing the book. I mean, it's important that we start making people aware of this stuff, even if they're not personally affected by it. You know, the 1 in 54, and it may be more or less in this country, depending. But if people aren't aware of this stuff, then it's very hard for them to be sensitive to it and to say the right things, because you also don't need extra pressure piled on by society, right?
Gareth, you have no idea how much I appreciate that we could have the opportunity to speak about autism today. I wrote the book because the autism tsunami is headed to South Africa. I call on all medical professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, occupational therapists.
What do you mean autism tsunami? What do you mean by that?
I don't think our planet, including South Africa, is realizing the stats, the numbers of children that are being diagnosed and that are struggling with this diagnosis and that need treatment. I don't think our medical professionals are actually aware.
Sure. All right. Well, there we go. Hopefully people be a little more empathetic now when they meet the parents of, or the kids who have, or, you know, relatives who've got something on the spectrum, because it sounds very, very difficult to deal with. Listen, lots of good things, and well done on the book, and we'll hopefully catch up with you again soon.
Thank you so much. My message is one of hope to parents. Never, ever give up. Autism means game on, not game over. And to all the voices out there representing the autism spectrum, please know that we respect all of you and we appreciate all of you. There's no just one voice on autism.
Yeah, you see, you even have to treat them with kid gloves here because they could tantrum. No, I hear you. I got you, Ilana. Thank you so much. Ilana,
thank you,
thanks, Ilana.
The author of Saving My Sons, A Journey with Autism, and Ilana Gershowitz. If you want to know more, you can find out on all the websites that she mentioned. And hopefully you get some help if this is something that you're dealing with every day. Wow.